Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Victoria. Lovely to be back. And again, I kind of hope that what I say will just sort of warm us up, really, for what Tom and Murray have to say. But anarchy feels strangely relevant. Maybe it's always relevant, but strangely relevant to me at the moment. And the reason is, well, if you think about the Greek, which of course you always do, it comes from the ancient Greek, which includes arche, which means kind of origin or source. You know, it sometimes means beginning, but it's like the root. And so it's kind of overthrowing, but I think not overthrowing the root, all roots, but it comes up in a time where the roots that have been around feel like they've become deracinated. They're not doing what they should for us. And so anarchy comes up actually strangely enough to find a new arche, a new connection to the source of life, to vitality. And I think it's coming up now because it feels to me, at least, like we're living in a very dualistic world. It's like you're either for or against. It's one or the other. It's black or white. It's left or right. It's trans or feminist. You know, Brexit or Remain. It's Cummings or the people. It's Trump or whatever's going to happen in America. You know, and people get really locked into this. So that's the kind of culture wars phenomenon. And part of the distress, I think, is whatever side you're on, it just kind of feels like there's no way out. It's living in this dualistic world. And I think that what has happened is we've lost touch with the kind of roots of our culture in many respects. We don't know quite what our politics or our culture, our society is for. And I think that we need to regain what Aristotle would call the pre-political. It's kind of like that which even comes before we try to do any politics. It's kind of what we're going to organize around. What is this politics even for? And when you lose sight of that, then everybody loses their bearings and sort of turns on each other. And it feels very difficult to break that jam, break that deadlock. Now, my guess is that we have lost touch with the kind of spiritual dimension. The bit that you might say is not just about material well-being, that's not just about more stuff, that's not just about life in terms of longevity. You know, we've kind of lost what our ancestors would have felt life was orientated around, which one way or another was realizing that the everyday life that we experience is but an echo or a shadow or a reflection or a taste of a much wider life towards which we're all headed, or at least we can kind of get in touch with the spiritual dimension, for want of a better expression. But that's just my take. And I don't think that what the pre-political is, what the arche is really going to be settled anytime soon. So we partly better get used to it, I think. But it is, I think, a time for experiments. And that's why I think this kind of theme of anarchy can speak to us. You know, when there isn't a general consensus, it's time for really serious engagement with what might be a route for us. And it's one of the reasons why I loved being found by The Idler and have loved everything that I do with Tom and Victoria. It's because I think that, as Tom once said to me, I think, you know, The Idler magazine was always this kind of big bag of different voices, all doing their thing, in the hope that, you know, one or two connect with you. That it kind of adds up to this big experiment, this big kind of, in a way, ongoing anarchic festival that is fun, that is flippant, that, you know, can have a drink and so on. But I love it because it's got a bit of seriousness behind it actually as well, because it realizes that something is not right in our times. And so this place of experiment is really useful. And tonight, you know, with Murray here particularly, we're going to be thinking about poetry. Now, I look forward to what Murray has to say about this more directly as a poet. But I think one of the reasons why poetry is so crucial in this phase is because, you know, it tries to put words together in such a way that you feel a freshness, you feel a new connection, you see a different view. You know, words have this ability to channel the arche, channel the soul, if the poet can put them together in such a way for us that that is kind of released in a burst. Maybe it's just fun, but maybe actually you go, oh my goodness, that I've seen something in that moment that I didn't really know even was there before, or at least I've been reminded is there. And so poetry is really crucial part of this effort, which I think we really need. You know, we're living in this dualistic world. We're too easily getting locked together in a kind of fight to the death, a zero-sum game. So all these experiments of which the Idler is such a brilliant champion and poetry in particular. Maybe that can help us to reconnect with arcades as experiments for now. Let's not think we can fix everything, but let's think that maybe we can tap into something that can give us a new lease of life, a bit of freshness, a bit of different take on things. Tom, does that fit with your sense?
Thank you, Mark. That's thanks. That's just great. Over to you, Tom. Do we need to unmute you?
I've now unmuted myself.
Well done.
Mark, thanks so much. Yes, that does fit in, because the protest in Seattle, well, it's not exactly a protest. It's much more of a sort of creative artwork in a sense, which has caught my eye over the last week or so, called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Autonomous Zone is a word from some anarchy. And this has already caught the attention of President Trump, who calls them, you know, terrorists and ugly anarchists. Well, that's something that anarchists have been putting up with since the days of Conrad, you know, when they were characterized as violent disruptors. Whereas, in fact, the word, as you say, anarchy is about getting back to something real. And it means, you know, monarch means one ruler, anarch means no ruler or against rule. But because there isn't a ruler, it doesn't mean there's disorder. But the enemies of anarchy, hang on, someone's on his, oh, there they go, sorry. The enemies of anarchy tend to characterize it and attack it as something sort of dirty, violent. And there's a piece about the Chaz in Seattle in a sort of semi-underground internet paper today that says, you know, of course it's not violent at all. It's incredibly peaceful. And in fact, anarchy is a very peaceful movement. I mean, one of its main proponents was Leo Tolstoy. Obviously, he wrote War and Peace, but later in life became what he called a Christian anarchist. He himself was inspired by the sort of Boston Quakers, who resisted government force by not voting, not taking any part in the government systems, because governments were by nature violent. And he was inspired by them to then inspire Gandhi to liberate India through non-violence. And they were all anarchist movements. So, I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating subject for study. And I'll try to get some of that across in these videos. Now, over to you, Murray. Let's unmute you first. You're unmuted. Murray, thanks so much for joining us. It's brilliant to see you, because we haven't seen you in lockdown at all. Now, where are you? You've got a lovely little painted wardrobe behind you, I think.
I'm in the laundry room, which this is the best part of it. The rest of it's all washing machines and stuff. So I set it up to look as good as it possibly can do.
It does look really good. It looks like you're in a sort of 18th century cupboard or something like that. Now, and also you look great. Your hair is terrific. Have you you haven't had a hairdresser, have you?
Well, maybe.
Okay. Well, we won't talk about that anymore. Now, what have you been doing in lockdown? Because, you know, around this time, we're used to seeing you at festivals. You're out and about. You're a wonderful performance poet. You're a playwright as well. You're in the theatrical world. What's it been like to, you know, be sort of more or less trapped inside?
It's been refreshing. So I had a play on an epic poem I wrote a couple of years ago called The Mystery of the Radish and Mumps, which we had turned into a theatrical production, which I decided to do the reading of the poem, or the theatricalized reading of the poem, which takes about an hour from end to end. And I'd been touring that for nearly 2 years, and I just got to that point where I was properly exhausted from it and really felt that I couldn't go on. And then another tour was coming, another 2 tours were coming of it, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And then suddenly lockdown came to my aid, and I didn't have to do it. And then the government gave me some money for not doing it. So I feel really pleased about the whole thing, to be honest. And
yeah.
And I had this huge slate of writing to get on with, which I'd been allowing to grow. So I've just finished the second draft of a screenplay, which has been really interesting. And it's a really tough and interesting discipline to work in, writing for the screen. And I think I'm getting better at it. I think it's my 7th full-length screenplay. So I'm getting to the point where they're beginning to make a bit of sense. And,
So it sounds like you've had a sort of Shakespearean experience, because
yes, I
we've been
read your
discussing.
article.
Yeah, Shakespeare sort of, there was a plague, everything was shut down as it is today, and then he came out with this amazing new work. So we'll be looking forward to it.
Well, I've also been R&Ding via Zoom with an Arts Council grant, a new play called the Ifley Snay, and it's for children, and so that's been going really well, and we're moving on with that. And but I suppose the big thing that I've been doing is working with a composer, musician, Paul Hartnoll from the band Orbital. And so I'm a weekly resident poet for BBC Six Music, and I come up with a topical sketch poem per week for them, which gets broadcast on a Friday. So tomorrow's will be on at 2 p.m. And I went to school with Paul, and I'd known him for a long time. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, and we'd been planning to do something together. And this became the perfect opportunity. So it started off with me working. Writing sketch poems, and then Paul putting a soundtrack to them. But then I thought, well, if I have a musician here, why not move into the format of classic pop song writing, but delivered in spoken word rather than sung? And so that's what we've been doing, and we've produced 14 weeks of them now. So tomorrow's The Secret Hairdresser is coming out. That will be, I've just heard it. And I write the piece, then I get my earphones in and get a click going at whatever beats per minute I need. And then I will recite into my iPhone dictaphone app, and then email it to Paul. Paul then works on it for about 24 hours, sends it back. We send it through to BBC Six Music, and then and they play it. So it's a really beautiful, instant bit of creativity. And one of the major issues, particularly with screenplay writing, is that you have somebody sitting there telling you whether it's good or it's not good, and then you don't ever know whether it's going to be made. You never know whether it's going to be realized, and a great deal of screenplays never get made, and lots of them get ruined by the directors when they do it, because it's never the writer's fault, but it's always the writer's fault. So you can, what do they say, you can't make, I can't remember it. Well,
that's. I remember interviewing Bruce Robinson years ago, who wrote With Nail and I. That was his experience. I mean, it actually drove him crazy. Although he's being well paid in Hollywood, he's writing all these films. None of them ever happened. If they did happen, they bore no resemblance to his original idea. And that's actually why he went back to writing books, because there was only one other guy, at the other end, or maybe two at the publisher.
Yeah, they're writing, they're just producing, a friend of mine's producing his new movie, which is called The Diaries of Christopher Thomas Penman, which was his second book. I read that when it came out, and I thought it was good. But I remember many years ago going to the alternative Eisteddfod in Wales, and I arrived, and there was a smoking sofa in the garden of this big, beautiful house. And that was apparently Howard Marks, who'd just burnt his room down, fallen asleep with a spliff in his hand. And there was many sort of crazy things that went on, including our old friend Jock Scott was there. But Bruce was there, and I was just going through quite a difficult time as a writer. And his advice to me was, just do your work. And it was the best advice that I've ever been given, because there's so much stuff you can get involved in, and so many egotistical manifestations that can come in and cloud the vision of a writer. But if you just get back to show, I don't know who it came from, but the 75% of success is showing up. And I think that's really the thing. So the great thing about this lockdown period for me is I've been able to show up to work and not have to go off to a festival and constantly so I've been able to develop a routine, which has been really good. And I've given up refined sugar, which has been a really interesting journey as well.
Now, let's play the song in a moment, Victoria, but can you just briefly describe your routine? I think I certainly find it very interesting to find out how people work, how many hours a day they can actually, particularly when you're doing something that requires so much, mental energy as writing. Do you sort of get up at 8 and sit down at 9 and work till 1? What's your routine?
Well, I get up at 7, then I meditate for 20 minutes, and then I express my gratitude for all the things that I have for another 10 minutes, which is a good start to the day. So just trying to start the day in calm and grateful. Then I have breakfast, which is huge. And then I'll work for 2 to 3 hours and then call it a day.
That's a wonderful routine. Yeah, it's not too exhausting, but it is amazing how productive actually you can be if you just sit down for 3 days a week. 3 hours a day. Sorry, what am I talking about?
Well, I don't think there's much more that I think you know, another very interesting thing from a writer's I've learned over the years is the one thing, if I ever ask for advice from younger persons or people just starting off doing it, is don't confuse your creative self with your editorial self. And so if I say I've got 3 hours to be creative and then there's a cutoff point, then I really push everything into that 3 hours. And then if I want to work in the afternoon, I work as an editor. And so I don't allow the editor into the room whilst I'm being creative. And I think a lot of people ruin their lives by as writers by allowing the editor into the room whilst their creative self should be left to itself.
Excellent advice. Now, Victoria, have you got? You can unmute yourself if you want to say anything, but you're going to start. You might need to unmute yourself if we're actually going to hear this. Oh, here we go.
On my gloves, I'm putting on my mask. I'll tell you where I'm going if you really have to ask. I'm going shopping, shopping. I'm going shopping, shopping. Tension in the air, no jet planes in the sky. I'm feeling pretty shifty, so don't look me in the eye. I'm going shopping, shopping. I'm going shopping, shopping. Stalking the aisles, making my selection, keeping my distance in the fruit and veg section. What are you doing? Why can't you see? You're not supposed to stand that close to me. So don't stand so, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Don't stand so, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Because I'm shopping, shopping, and yes, I'm shopping, shopping. Like a donkey and I'm looking like a thief, arriving like a pilgrim from a distant land. But nobody touched me till I washed my hands, because I've been shopping, shopping. 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 Washed my hands, washed my hands, washed my hands, washed my hands. Shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. Shopping, 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 shopping.
Brilliant. Oh, that is superb. It's quite exciting. It reminds me of being in a field in 1991. But it's got a lot of political content. It's got a message, doesn't it, Murray?
Well, yeah.
Who did the visuals? They're amazing.
There was an animation producer who's worked with Orbital for, I think, most of their career, and his name is Giles Thacker, and I think he's going to be doing some more as well.
So Orbital is still rocking. I mean, how old are they? They must be in their late 60s by now.
No, because Paul was only a year above me at school, so that makes him about 32.
Well, it's great to see you all back together again, and being young. Okay, so it's obviously what you've done. Mark talked about what poetry is about. Well, for me, it's often, I think it's Alexander Pope said something like, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed. So it seems to me what you've done in that piece is to sort of express something that we're all kind of half feeling, but hadn't quite put our finger on. Now, is that something that you do sort of consciously as an artist?
Yeah, well, I think it's a natural part of the expression, and I think it's a good description is interfacing. And I did something a few years ago at CERN with which was an interface between science and religion, and I think this is an interface between people and the shifting realities of lockdown, which is what I've been working on. And there were so many versions of the truth, and I was getting, I imagine lots of other people here were getting huge amounts of information via WhatsApp and email and etc., with millions of different conspiracy theories coming through. And I actually got I think I started almost getting ill from the conspiracy theories at one point, and then and I didn't want to pass any of that on to the people listening, and so to work in the format of a songwriter with with the real simple structure, but also then trying to take things which were part of everybody's experience, which I think is something which I always try and work with, try to not be exclusive in what I'm doing. So trying to take things that made sense to everybody, or trying to make sense of things that people held commonly within the experience of lockdown, and then try to present those in a form which were diverting and amusing and allowing people a bit of light relief, rather than attempting to get into what was what, because I think it's going to take a long time before this thing shakes down and we really understand what's happened to us. So I'm right there, really close up, like everybody else, but just saying, okay, this is what's happening.
Well, it was great to see that, and I think you've got some other poems which reflect the experience that a lot of us have been going through.
Sure.
And the first one is simply titled "Working from Home." And would you be able to give us a live reading?
Sure. And so this is, again, these are sketch pieces. So, okay, so this one is called "I'm Working from Home." And it says here, the 20th of the 3rd, 2020. So this was just before lockdown had started, but people were fleeing their offices and workplaces and getting home in this. And I think the panic buying was starting up, and a lot of people who hadn't worked from home before were starting to. And so this is me sharing my experience of being a long-time home worker. I'm working from home, it's just me. I'm being the best I can be. I've done all the tidying now, the washing, the ironing, the what and the how, and I'm texting a bit as I go, and I'm checking the gram with a post just to show that I'm keeping my platform dispersed. Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, diverse is the name of the game. I'm a digital nomad. I'm tweaking the frame, and there's YouTube to think about too, and it's all about balance. I know this is true, but hey, I'm evolving my role. I'm more than aware one can fall down a hole of exploding stars and luxury cars and sutras and mudras and tra-la-la-las, and there's alien life on the moon, and the Nazis that taught that baboon to drive a miniature submarine to smash them all to smithereens. But that was way back in the Second World War. Just look at this clip, and there's so much more, so much more. I mean, ask me anything about Hitler. Ask me anything about Hitler. He died in 1963, somewhere deep in the Argentine, and there's crop circles, blues, and there's grays, and there's a wondrous number of ways that when studied, one can quickly find that vinegar works on the body and mind, and how work is not needed at all. And the secret of life is surrender, and all of the things that we think we see are just a mirage, and we can all be free to be beautiful creatures of light and to grow wings and take fabulous fright. And if you want to know more, just pick up the phone, let's chat, FaceTime, Zoom, house party, Instagram, anything, because I'm working from home.
Whoa, that's beautiful.
And you can have a big clap.
A round of applause.
You have to unmute yourselves, give them a big clap.
Okay, we thought working from home was good, but you got two more. Murray, you got two more. There are two more poems, I think, before we go back to some thoughts from Mark.
Yes, okay.
And then we're going to have questions from everybody. So line up your questions, everybody, from about sort of 20 to 7 to 7 o'clock. Murray will be answering questions, or Mark or me. Now, the next one is jogging and baking. Jogging and baking. Why that title?
Well, it was I think jogging and baking was of course, when we had all of our social activities taken away very quickly through lockdown. I think this was possibly the first, well, it says here, this is the 28th. So this is the first week of lockdown. And I think everybody started jogging and baking all at the same time. And so getting out, and there was a certain feeling of legitimacy in running. And I think a lot of people went out and there was a feeling that if you went out of your house for doing anything other than shopping or jogging, then you were somehow breaking the law. And so everyone stayed in and did baking. So this is the for the first sort of craze of lockdown. Yep. Fine, pretty good. It's all about staying busy and baking and jogging. Yes, jogging and baking and sit-ups and baking and reading and baking and chatting to friends, and then jogging and baking and eating and baking, then going out jogging to jog off the baking, then getting back home, and then going out shopping and queuing, then baking and trying to make sense of the stuff that is happening, and jogging and baking and listening to Boris, and then the people repeat what he's saying over and over in strange newsy voices, then baking and jogging and trying not to feel gloomy and just wondering where the whole thing is going, and jogging and baking and baking and jogging, and realizing whole generations of people went through so much worse for so very much longer, and that was before the invention of jogging, and they didn't even have the things needed for baking. So feeling quite grateful for baking and jogging and going to bed and then dreaming of baking and waking each morning and asking somehow if it's gone back to normal, and then seeing it hasn't, and jogging and baking and baking and jogging and jogging and baking and baking and jogging some more.
Oh, big round of applause, everybody. Unmute yourselves for a second. Oh, I relate to that.
And okay, Murray, we got another one, haven't we?
Yeah. So this one's a song, but I'll read it. And which, because it's not a song, it's written in song form, so if it repeats itself a lot. And this is called, and it's one of my favorites of the 14 that we've done together, which I was thinking, so what is another thing that we all have in common? And I think the title of this says it all. And this is on the 3rd of the 6th, 2020. And it's called, I've been a little bit up and down. I've been a little bit up and down. I've been a little bit up and down, a bit ooh, bit ah, bit near, bit far. Yes, I've been a little bit up and down. You see, I was quietly doing my thing before the COVID bell went ding, 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 and the shops and the pubs and the schools and the clubs and the streets and the road with a rub-a-dub-dub, they suddenly came to an end. And distinctly between now and then, I've been a little bit up and down. I've been a little bit up and down, a bit pa-pa, a bit tra-la-la-la. Yes, I've been a little bit up and down. There were times I haven't been at my best, a bit one flew over the cuckoo's nest, and I wouldn't say I was losing the plot, just struggling to tell the why from the what and the false from the true and the me from the you, and eventually just what we're all going to do. And I've been a little bit up and down. I've been a little bit up and down, a bit that, bit rat-a-tat-tat. Yes, I've been a little bit up and down. But then I pull back the focus from all the hocus pocus, and I look out at the star-filled sky, and I let go of the what and why, surrender to the here and now. Let Mother Nature take a bow beneath the the twisting Milky Way and understand that it's okay. It's okay that I've been a little bit up and down. I've been a little bit up and down, a bit ooh, bit ah, bit near, bit far. Yes, I've been a little bit up and down.
Oh,
Very clever. Yeah.
quite a philosophical one, that one.
Well, it comes to us in lots of...
Oh, what's going on there? Bruno, we've got to meet you, I'm afraid. Sorry. Now,
Well, they've been sort of becoming philosophical here and there, and I try and pull from it as much as I can, but it seems to be inevitable.
what do you understand by the word anarchism?
Well, it was interesting when you mentioned the autonomous zone earlier, and I was reading, and I can't remember who wrote it, but there was a book called Senseless Acts of Beauty a few years ago, which was based on talking about festivals as temporary autonomous zones. But in answer to your question, I think it's the idea of dispensing with lawmakers or rulers. And I remember reading, I think it was George Orwell, on the Spanish Civil War, where one of the major problems with the anarchist troops is that the commanding officers had to go through enormous negotiations in order to command, because they weren't really supposed to be doing it. So I think I think going deeper into it, I think that anarchy, it seems to deal with the idea that, or refute the idea that we are the narrative that we are, that's portrayed, that if we lose the rigid structures of laws that govern us, then we will all revert to warlords, crazy people, and everyone shooting each other and mad stuff going on. And I think that's one of the major things that holds the structures of our society together, is the fear of what is termed anarchy.
Yeah, and people are made to feel frightened of what would happen if we didn't have rulers. But you know, when lockdown happened, and people, in a way, didn't have a ruler because people weren't going to the office, they didn't have a job, kind of. You know, they were staying at home. In fact, they had more autonomy, and more leisure time too. And what you normally hear from Tories, or you know, from all politicians actually, right and left, is that if people are left alone, then they'll do bad things, that the devil finds work for idle hands to do. But actually, when we had idle hands, everyone did amazing things. They went shopping. I was going to say shopping. They weren't going shopping. They were going cycling. Everyone's now got amazing looking gardens. And we enjoyed sitting at home and sort of being more creative, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I went to stay in an anarchist community in the Spanish mountains a few years ago, in a place called Orquiva, which is interesting because they'd had the Spanish Civil War happen there, and apparently half the local village had killed the other half during, you know, their grandparents had all been involved in it, and it was a deeply divided place, and the only thing that brought them back together was their mutual hatred of the hippies at the anarchist commune. But this was up in the hills, and the interesting thing is, when I got there, I saw a baby who'd got impetigo all over his face, and I said, "Why had that happened?" And somebody said, "Well, because people are peeing and shitting in the river," and I said, "Well, are there no loos anywhere?" And they said, "No, because nobody's made them, because they've got no organization between them." And apparently a German guy who owned the land that they were squatting had said that they could have it if they just made one series of recordings of their campfire music, but they refused because they felt that if they owned the land, then they would destroy their anarchy. But one of the other really interesting things about it was there was a lot of runaway prisoners there, and there was a guy who looked like Sean Connery who had who styled himself as a sort of charismatic holy man stroke wizard, and he was going around sort of collecting followers, and there was a real tension to the whole thing, and there was definitely a struggle going on, but more than in normal life, I don't know.
Some of these anarchist communes get taken over by, you know, one sort of charismatic ruler or something like that, and they don't tend to last. But the ones in Seattle now, we've got a few people, Kevin and Julia from Seattle and Steve Kay in this evening. It's not going to last forever, but it's like Mark said at the beginning. They just put some ideas out there, and just the fact of their existence for a few weeks, in the Spanish Civil War or whenever it was, it just helped you to sort of look at the world from a slightly different angle.
I completely agree, and I think that this place also had amazing things going on, and the senseless acts of beauty and the random acts of kindness that were going on. And people finding their own ways of contributing with things, rather than people becoming attached through their egos to the idea that somebody needs to take control of this place and somebody needs to sort this thing out. In fact, what this place needs is a king, and lots of people arrive, and that's the initial thing to reaching an anarchist community, and they think somebody really needs to just sort this place out. And you say, well, I wonder who that person is. Could that person be you by any chance?
Now, Murray, what about you? Before we go back to Mark, how did you get into writing in the first place? Why didn't you get a job? I mean, Samuel Beckett, at the end of his life, he said, it's all been a bit of a nightmare. I should have got a job at Guinness's, as father suggested. You didn't get a job at Guinness's or go into the corporation. You forged a life as a poet. So it must have been difficult. But it's a noble path. Why did you go on that path in the first place? What got you into writing?
Well, I think the fact that I couldn't do it, and I have a brother who's sort of hyper intelligent and brilliant at everything, and went to Oxford, and I was sort of written off as a creator of and I've suffered from very quite heavy dyslexia as well, so I would produce bits of written work at school and think, now that is the bomb, and I'd hand it in, and I'd get something back with an E on it. I just didn't understand why people didn't understand what I was talking about, and so it's sort of slowly come upon me there was a moment where I thought, well, very much like I was discussing earlier, the idea of being a performer or a storyteller or the idea of asking somebody else if I was allowed to be creative and have somebody else say to me yes or no, I felt affronted by that. And so the idea that I created my own work and then recited it or did whatever I did seemed to be the only sensible thing to do. And then I was in control of the means of production all the way through. And as a result, I don't end up in a situation where I'm being kicked around, apart from the fact that recently, having been got involved in screenwriting, which is nothing but being kicked around, but I kind of enjoy it. I don't think I would have enjoyed it beforehand, but I quite enjoy the whole process of being harassed by people who don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, there are certainly many trials to be suffered in the poet's life, and you're not the first to have suffered these trials, of course. I think one of the only poets who really made a really good living was Alexander Pope. I don't know how he did it.
Well, I suppose I was years ago, and somebody sent me the front page of the Daily Telegraph from 1997 with a big picture of me on the front, and simply everyone's taking cocaine poem written down the outside of it.
Yeah, should I just remind people, because we all remember that poem, Simply Everyone's Taking Cocaine. And Murray was all over the place in the 90s. And there was this story that he'd been paid £1 million by EMI, the highest advance ever paid to a poet. But I don't think that really sort of worked out very well for you in the end.
Well, it did, in the sense that I got the lesson that I needed, and I think, and I was going to throw myself off that cliff. And I think I was driven at that point and that age, which is quite forgivable, of course, of the young, is I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to show people that I could be somebody. And what better way than showing people what I could be by doing something amazing. And so I did something amazing, and it was truly amazing, really. And but the lesson that came with it was brutal, really, really brutal on a mental health level. I think I probably had a nervous breakdown. It took me at least 10 years to recover in any way from it. I didn't write or speak out loud in public for 3 years. Mark Rylance, Shakespeare's Globe, asked me to go and write something for Shakespeare's Globe as the first thing that I did. And I remember standing on stage at the Shakespeare's Globe and I went out there and my energy was so confused that the crowd started booing, thinking that I was being a deliberate villain. You know, that's where I was at. And but to then go away from presenting myself as the fully formed article and clearly not being that, and then being sent away to start again and learn how to write properly and be humble, that was clearly the lesson that I needed, and it was a very hard lesson, but you know, I've learned my craft as a result of it.
Well, Murray, thanks for telling us your story. That's absolutely fantastic. And fascinating. In a sense, you've been a poet twice. You know, the first time round, it was kind of flashy and 90s, and the second time round, it's been much tougher. Mark Vernon, are you there? Because it's our time to go to you.
I am. By the wonders of Zoom telepathy, Victoria's already told me that there are questions.
Okay,
there
well,
are. So we've got a good question for Mark from Sarah. Sarah.
Hello. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello. My question is, Mark, at your intro, you described exactly how I'm feeling at the moment, and you called it the binary world. So how do we get ourselves out of the binary world, and do we all have to become anarchists to do so?
Well, I think anarchists is one route, because if that's about experimenting and trying to find a third position, you know, I work as a psychotherapist, and often what you do when you're listening to someone in the room is, you know, there's like them and their problem, and there's them and their problem, them and their problem, them and their problem, you know, and that's of course why they're here, and they need you as a third sort of set of ears listening in for those moments where you think, now that's a bit different. Or what about that fantasy, or what about that possibility? So in times like this, sort of collectively, I think we have to listen for the third thing that feels like it's got a kind of freedom. That's quite a good little measure. If it feels a bit freer, then, you know, follow it up and see where it leads. And, you know, sometimes you have to get involved in these squabbles. They're not completely mindless. They are about real things. But I always try and keep one foot firmly in what feels like it might go off in a different direction.
Mark, we've got another question for you from Elizabeth Leward. Elizabeth, could you quickly unmute yourself and ask that?
Gotcha. Mark, was exile the worst thing that could happen to an Athenian? And do you think that lockdown was a form of exile?
What a wonderful question. I mean, actually it was. I think we might have said before that desert island discs would have been thought of as the most peculiar kind of celebration of torture in the ancient world. And because it was a fate worse than death. And the reason is that I think in the ancient world, there was this much more sense that you belonged to, you know, the idiot. The word idiot comes from idiotes, the ancient Greek, which means the one who thinks they can live on their own in splendid isolation. So yeah, but I think it is different for us now. I think that we do have a more gathered sense of being an individual. And I mean, maybe like Murray was saying, actually, you know, when the creative self is at work, maybe one way of thinking about that is you go inside and you kind of like see the microcosm, and then you invite the editor in to see how that might connect with the macrocosm. So I think now we do have a much keener sense of what it is to be an individual than was the case back then. You know, so hence lockdown can be this, you know, tremendously creative period, again, as Murray was saying.
Great. There's a question from Emma Lindsay. She doesn't want to ask it herself, so I said I would. I think it's a good one for both of you, although she asked Murray. Where would you look for inspiration for poetry for a funeral about love and loss? Maybe Murray first. Mark might have an idea.
In the sense of writers, or as a writer?
I think Emma probably has to read a poem at a funeral. Where would she look first?
It's a really tough one.
I think it's a bit of a tough one. Mark, you might have an idea.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking online because
Wait a minute, hang on. Murray was just about to say something.
Sorry, Murray. That's my fault.
I didn't have an awful lot to say. I think there aren't that many good ones. I've looked through lots, and I get asked regularly. The one that I least like is "Do Not Go Gentle," which I find a really annoying poem. But I really like. And "Death Shall Have No Dominion." I think that's a very powerful piece of writing, and that's the best one that I think is there, because it's even though it doesn't make a lot of sense in places, it's just something which gets hold of the concept of the loss of a life and the dispersal of that life back into the elements, and I like that.
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't mind talking. It's just, yeah, it's my dad, and he died last week, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
he wasn't really into poetry, and I don't want to read something for the sake of it. And that poem that you mentioned just previously, I really don't like it. The one that you said you don't like. I don't want to read that poem, and I don't want to read something for the sake of it. So I've been trying to find something that's maybe based a bit on
Emma,
nature.
we'll have a think. We'll have a think. Mark, you've got an idea.
Chat. Can you see the chat? Because people are making suggestions in the chat as well.
So have a look through that, and we'll, if we have any other ideas, we'll send them.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Murray, could you just repeat the name of the one that you mentioned? And "Death Shall Be Our Dominion."
Death Shall Have No Dominion. But there's some interesting suggestions in the chat line as well there from our.
Okay, we're going to go on to Ian.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Emma. We've got a question from Doris. Doris, would you ask your question?
Oh, hi. Well, first of all, thank you. These Idler Thursdays really widen my horizon, and I learned so much. And Mary, I really enjoy your poems. Although I have to say, I've been to a lot of poets readings before in the US and in this country. Well, in this country, actually, not so many, because I'm new here. But you are the most performance-centric poet that I've come across. So my question to you is whether the poems that you've read, they're also musical. Is this a style that you have developed for the lockdown because you wanted to lift our spirits? Or is this just your personal style? Because like my favorite poet, one of my favorite poets is Philip Larkin. And anytime you read his poem, you just want to slip your wrist. So yeah, I'll let you talk.
Well, I think Philip Larkin is misdiagnosed often. I think he's very funny and very deeply, darkly funny, and you've just got to get it right. You've just got to hit it right, I think, to get into his humour. But yes, I've been working with a composer, and it just seemed for me it was just too much of a good opportunity not to write in songwriting form for working with him. But the previous two were more in a free form poetry style. But I have a really, really keen sense of rhythm, and I put it down to having been taken to watch lots and lots and listen to lots and lots of Gilbert and Sullivan performances as a child by my mother, which has this incredible rhythms to it. And then I got into the early hip hop music as well, which is of course deeply rhythmic. So I just can't resist rhythm, and that's why I guess it feels musical. As far as the performance element goes, there is actually a cape in that cupboard behind me, so you know it could get even more performancey.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Ian Anchors. Ian Anchors? And then David Hyman after that. Are you there, Ian? While Ian's trying to unmute himself, if he is there, There was also a question about the series of songs you've just made with Paul Hartnoll, Murray. Will it come out as an album? Will they be released as a full album?
They will. I was discussing it with Paul's management yesterday, and we're at 14 at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be any sign of us stopping. And if you on Orbital's Facebook, there's a lot of them on there, so people can go and find them there if they want to. But the feeling that the idea is when would one let these go? Because it feels to us very much that they would be part of lockdown nostalgia when that kicks in. So we're thinking maybe anything from 6 months to a year's time, when hopefully the dust has settled and we're looking at our new selves with a little bit more perspective than we have now. And then to actually have a real week to week documented dialogue on what went down might be a really interesting thing for people. But I think if we put it out too soon, we'll just get caught up in the deluge of releases that's will be going on between now and Christmas.
Well, actually, that links to a question from Josephine Adams, which I'll repeat for you. Just what will you carry from lockdown as a positive in your life, Murray?
It's had a hugely positive effect on me. But I think my dealing with a lot of minor addiction issues, actually taking a closer look at myself, getting to know myself a bit better, stopping the running, I think. And I think I've felt that I've had to be in a room with myself a lot more, and my distractions have been less. So therefore I've had to face up to a few things. And there have been moments where I've, really have struggled. And that has been when I've been faced with the difficult things that I haven't been looking at in myself. So I've had a bit more of a chance to get to know myself.
Have you been by yourself all the time, or have you been able to see your children, or have you been very alone?
No, I haven't. I've seen my children. I went down right in probably about week 4. I went down to Lewis, and my children live in Sussex, and I went on an empty M25 and an empty M23, listening to early Bob Dylan, which is quite interesting. But yeah, so I've been fine, and there's been people around. So I haven't been. My father's been completely. I've attempted to go and see him 3 times, but he refuses to see me. He's because I'm from London. He doesn't want me. He refuses to even go for a 2 meters apart walk with me. But there we are.
Yeah. So. Sarah Sanderson wanted to know about your sugar. Maybe it's a minor sugar addiction, Murray, but what effect did it have giving up sugar?
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm on month 17 of giving up alcohol, which has been a really interesting journey. But I think for a lot of people, when they give up alcohol, people say, how is it going not drinking? I say, well, it's fine, apart from I find myself literally in a sweet shop eating a bar of chocolate, which I haven't paid for, and I don't know how I got there. That's where my sugar addiction was taking me. And it was really jaggy. I was really piling into it. Whenever I had uncomfortable feelings, I'd usually go to the pub, and now it was okay, straight into the sugar. So got through the finishing refined sugar, had a crisis, and I think month 3 is usually the crisis month when it happens for addicts. And I had a big crisis about my car. I always decide, it's an old car, and I always decide whenever there's a problem, it always ends up as a big crisis about my car. But the interesting thing was that about 3.5 months into giving up sugar was Easter, and my mother sent me an Easter egg through the post, and it sat there and it sat there and it sat there, and I went past it, and then finally I'm just going to eat the Easter egg. So I ate the Easter egg, the whole thing in one go, like I would have done before, then another 2 probably, and it was like proper drug hit. my nose started vibrating, the front of my head started feeling like it was moving in and out. The whole, my sort of consciousness came right to the front of my face. I sat there feeling high as a kite for about 3 hours, woke up the next day feeling awful, and then had an emotional collapse later in the day. And that's just sugar. So there you are. So I'm not going back.
I've got to apologise to lots of people who I thought we were going to have time to ask questions of you, Murray, Ian, David. I'm really sorry, but we have run out of time because what we don't want to miss is one more poem from you, if you would.
Yes, and this is again in the song format, and it's been as we've been denied as consumers. And this is called, I won't give it any more, and this any more introduction. It's called I've Got a Delivery Coming. I do not know what day it is. I guess it's what they say it is. It's kind of like I've been away or just gotten back from holiday. I'm having quite the strangest dreams. The weather's holding up, it seems. I'm keeping it informal, embracing the new normal. You ask me how I do it. Well, there's really nothing to it because it's click, click, click. Goes the mouse, footsteps up to the house, ring, ring, ring. It's the same dopamine hit to the brain because I've got a delivery coming. Yes, I've got a delivery coming. Yes, I've got a delivery coming. A yoga mat, a magic mix, a chainsaw and a hockey sticks, and some incense and a crystal light, resistance band, vermiculite. It isn't like I'm in a hurry, waiting for banana curry, dressing down and feeling groovy, like I'm in some crazy movie. Click, click, click. Goes the mouse, footsteps up to the house, ring, ring, ring. It's the same dopamine hit to the brain because I've got a delivery coming. Yes, I've got a delivery coming. 7 weeks, 7 jigsaws, 47 days, 2 home haircuts, 1,128 hours, 9 quizzes, 67,680 minutes, 9 pizzas, 4 million seconds, a polytunnel, kombucha, pot plants. But everything's gonna be okay because I've got a delivery coming. Yes, I've got a delivery coming. Yes, I've got a delivery coming.
Yay!
What fun. Mara, we get fun and philosophy from you. Yes, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for being so honest and generous.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Everything. It's amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mark, for your wise wisdom, as always. Thank you all for being here, everybody. We leave the meeting open, so you're welcome to stay and chat if you've got friends in the group, so we can hang out for a bit. I just wonder whether we should play that single once more. Who would like? Yes! Shall I do that?
Yes, please.
Let's play it. So we'll do that. I could do it just the sound, or do you want the visuals as well? Visuals as well. Let me see if I can find it.
Vic?
Yeah.
It's available on Bandcamp, and all proceeds are going to NHS charities together.
There you go. All process going to NHS charities, which is great. I'm going to have a look for it. Keep chatting, and I'm going to find it again.
Murray, do you like baking?
I have baked the Sylvia Plath tomato soup cake, which I can highly recommend.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
There's no such thing.
There is.
There is.
It's a post-war cake when sweetness was in short supply, so tomato canned soup had so much sugar in it.
Have you tried the mushroom soup cake?
No.
Magic mushroom soup cake.
A savoury cake, sir.
Oh my god, I just had deja vu. It's really weird, isn't it, when you have deja vu? They were talking about
I was just putting the.
I've had that already.
Magic mushroom soup, when?
It's always good. I like them.
It is always good.
Oh, they're all good.
Well, probably, yeah.
Chocolate.
Oh my God. No, we're on-
Sugar and tomato. Hello.
Let's make this up again.
I'm putting on my gloves, I'm putting on my mask. I'll tell you where I'm going if you really have to ask. I'm going shopping, shopping. I'm going shopping, shopping. I'm going shopping, shopping. Making my selection, keeping my distance in the fruit and veg section. What are you doing? Oh, why can't you see? You're not supposed to stand that close to me. So don't stand so, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Don't stand so, don't stand so, don't stand so close to me. Because I'm shopping, shopping, and yes, I'm shopping, shopping. And now I'm waddling home, I'm feeling the relief. I'm way down like a donkey and I'm looking like a thief. Arriving like a pilgrim from a distant land. But nobody touched me till I washed my hands. Because I've been shopping, shopping. 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 Washed my hands, washed my hands, washed my hands, washed my hands. Shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, shopping. I've been shopping, 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 shopping.